What's going on, everybody? Matt Bove, Joe Buscaglia. We're out here at the NFL Combine. Joe and I haven't talked on camera in a little while, so we figured we would get the band back together. I think Howard is back in Western New York, paying no attention to this.
He's going to be waving.
He was going to be waving as he watches this on
his,
YouTube and on WKBW.com.
When he's watching on his desktop computer.
His desktop computer, yeah, with one of those massive towers that weighs like 40 pounds. What's the biggest thing we've learned in the last 3 days? Specifically, not about the future, but, well, I guess it is about the future. Not about the draft, just about the Bills and their process.
Yeah, I think they are keeping a pretty firm eye on their 2025 cap sheet in some of their dealings, and that's something that I think is important for them for their long-term overall health. Now, they're not going to be able to just say, okay, we're not going to push any money forward because they're still, from an effective cap space perspective, according to Over the Cap, are $43 million over. Yeah. So not ideal, but I think for them, the term that Brandon Beane said is, what we can do to make sure it's not a mess in 2025 and 2026. And I think this year it's pretty much a mess. So I think you're going to see a lot of lower tier signings, maybe some re-signings, maybe stock up on some compensatory picks this offseason and see exactly how things go from there.
Daquan Jones, the top of that list. You think of the guys that they would prioritize the most?
You would have to think, just because they do have two starters at defensive end. I mean, Greg Rousseau is a locked-in starter, and Von Miller, I guess you can trot him out there as the starter. But they don't have anything outside of Ed Oliver right now. And Daquan Jones played such an important position at that one technique. And so you look at his age, look at his injury history from this past year, there's a chance his market falls flat, and they're able to get him back on a pretty cost-effective deal.
When we think about the safeties, Micah Hyde would need a new contract. Jordan Poyer has a contract. What do you think of that whole thing? Because I don't know. After talking to Brandon Beane on Tuesday, I don't feel any more confident that they're going to be back.
No, the term I would use is non-committal to the entire safety group. I mean, to openly mull whether or not it's right to move on from both this year, move on from one, or keep both. I mean, these are all options that are on the table for the Bills. I think what has to happen is they need to make sure that they're making the most of the cap dollars that they have available to them. And so if they find a safety out there on the open market that's a pretty good deal that they liked when they came out in the draft, then maybe that's an opportunity to save that almost $6 million from Jordan Poyer and get that new safety in town and just kind of reset the position. So they're not ruling anything out. I wouldn't rule out Poyer returning this year, but I think at this point I would expect at least one new safety.
So before Joe and I started recording this, I was doing an interview with somebody from the national media, and they asked us what we think happens to Stefon Diggs. Now, I'm not going to throw this person under the bus, but when I hear that question, in the back of my head I go, why is this still something that we're talking about? Now, I also realize we are looking at this from the Bills' perspective of people who are around the team every day. But why does this keep coming back? Like, Stefon Diggs isn't going anywhere.
Because of cryptic tweets.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all it boils down to. And, I'm sure they would think back to what his brother tweeted mid-season about Josh, and that maybe adds some fuel to the fire. But the simple fact from a dollars sense is the Bills would be somewhat foolish and illogical to move on at this point in his deal. They could save this year if they do a post-June 1 designation and trade him and do all that. They could save this year. But they're also fast-forwarding $22 million to the 2025 cap. And I think that's something that Brandon Beane would like to avoid for most contracts, not named Josh Allen if he can. So to me, I think Stefon Diggs is back. Brandon Beane talked about how he still feels he's a number one, and let's not forget the first half of the season he was
a number one.
He was on pace to smash all of his career single season records, and then things shifted. Whether it was how they shifted their offense or how teams started to defend them, things changed. But I don't think that was all Stefon Diggs. You could still see on film he's getting open, everything like this. Still a great player. It's just a matter of them finding something to help him. And I think that's where the draft comes in.
Okay. I know that we have been busy for the last couple days, but we've probably both had different conversations with people who specifically cover the draft, and I know we're just coming off of what we said about Stefon Diggs. It feels like the hype about the wide receiver class is very real. It feels like if you ever needed a wide receiver, now would be the time to need one.
Yeah, it's a good class, and it's somewhat reminiscent of the the C.D. Lamb,
Yep.
Jerry Jeudy, who hasn't really worked out that well, but was still a great prospect, and Justin Jefferson. Like those guys ended up falling because the class was so good that year. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. So I would not be surprised with how much emphasis there is on passing and beating split safety and everything like that for the Bills, maybe even to have to get aggressive in the draft. And I know that's something fans love to hear.
Yeah.
Because they just say, oh no, trade back or stay where you are, don't give up draft picks. But they might need to get the specific sort of caliber receiver that they want that perfectly fits their offense.
I was talking to somebody yesterday who was telling me about this wide receiver class in particular. We know there's the big three with Harrison, with Adunze, and with Malik Neighbors. He said that the guys between 4 and 7, he all thinks are better prospects than Smith and Jigba last year, than Jordan Addison last year, than Zay Flowers this year. So even if you're moving up to get the guy who you think is the 4th best, last year that guy would have been the 1st best, and look at what those players did in the league. That's coming from 2 guys who play in a dynasty fantasy football league together and are always looking for those young players. Give me a final thought as we wrap this up. We're halfway through the first week of the Combine here. What's your final thought?
My final thought is that the Bills are still going to keep their foot halfway on the gas. Now, like we opened up with, I think they're going to be conscientious of what they're doing and pushing too much money forward. I think they have to be realistic about which contracts they choose to renegotiate. Don't touch Von Miller's deal because you don't want that on your books again next year. But I think for them, having that foresight in future years, and then while also still trying to put enough pieces together this year in this offseason, whether it be draft, free agency, what have you, I think that to them, they don't want to spoil a year of Josh Allen's prime. So that was my biggest take.
All right, that is Joe Buscaglia. You can read his work over at The Athletic. You can listen to his podcast, The Buffalo Beat. He writes a lot. I talk a lot. That's why we make a nice team for Joe. I'm Matt. We'll talk to you guys soon.